Folks, this is Don Medellin. We're going to give it just a few more minutes for everybody else to get logged back on and ensure that the Q&A feature is enabled on your Zoom toolbar. So we're going to give it just a couple more minutes to make sure we get everybody back. Okay, folks, this is Don Medellin. We're going to go ahead and connect back with everybody again. Sorry for that technical glitch, but we wanted to make sure that the Q&A feature is activated on your Zoom toolbar, and we had to go back and enable that to ensure that you can communicate with us throughout the workshop. So again, I'm going to, here's the agenda. I already went through this once, so I'm not going to belabor this and go through it again. Everybody should have a copy of the agenda. It's available online as well. So what I will do is go straight into our format and just explain that one more time. So our format for today is to use the Q&A feature on your Zoom toolbar to submit questions throughout the workshop. And again, those questions can be submitted at any time throughout the workshop. This is the only means that the public will be able to engage with us during the workshop. And the questions from the public will be addressed toward the end after the presentations. And then they will be read out loud, indicate who they are from, and then staff will provide live answers for everyone to hear. So you should be able to hear the question as well as a live answer from our staff. And our staff will introduce themselves. We will also indicate who the question is from. The one thing I do ask everybody to do during the Q&A portion as you're asking questions, if you could please be as specific as possible for each question. And if it's about one of the presentations, if you could indicate the slide number that you're referring to, that would certainly help our staff to ensure that we provide adequate answers and we clearly understand what you're asking. So try and be as specific as possible. And there'll be a large block of time toward the end of the presentation. And again, you can ask and submit a question at any time throughout the workshop. So that's our format for today. We'll go ahead and get started. And I'm going to turn it over to Tony Edwards. Go ahead, Tony.
Good morning, and thank you, Don. This is Tony Edwards with the Applied Sciences Bureau. And we like to always start our public workshops with a little background information, in this case on water reservations, for those of you that are joining us for the first time. Next slide. Section 373.2234 of the Florida statutes gives authority to the district to develop and adopt water reservations for the protection of fish and wildlife or public health and safety. A water reservation sets aside a quantity of water from consumptive uses. That water cannot be used for consumptive uses. The Water Resources Development Act of 2000 requires protection of water for comprehensive Everglades restoration plan projects prior to execution of cost share agreements between the district and the Army Corps of Engineers for their construction. And water reservations may be used for this purpose. They can also be parts of recovery and prevention strategies for minimum flow and minimum water level water bodies. Next slide. Some things that water reservations do not do or are not intended to do include prevention of the use of unreserved water or water that is already allocated in consumptive use permits. They don't establish operating regimes nor drought-proof a system. They're not intended to proliferate wildlife. And it's important to remember that water reservations are not intended to improve water quality. Next slide. When the district develops a water reservation, there are many steps involved. These are 5 of the main steps involved in developing a water reservation for the protection of fish and wildlife. We first identify the water body that needs protection. We characterize its hydrology. We identify the fish and wildlife that inhabit or utilize those water bodies that need protection. We establish linkages between the hydrology of the water body and the water needs of those fish and wildlife. And finally, we define a specific quantity of water needed for those wildlife. Next. The district has adopted 5 water reservations to date throughout the district, which cover a little over 172,000 acres. The most recent of which was the Caloosahatchee River C43 West Basin Storage Reservoir, shown in the figure in red. Next. The Kissimmee River and Chain of Lakes water reservations are being adopted for the protection of fish and wildlife as well. When complete, they'll be adopted into Chapter 40E10 of the Florida Administrative Code, as well as relevant parts of the Applicants Handbook for water use permit applications in the South Florida Water Management District, which we typically abbreviate simply the Applicants Handbook. The Applicants Handbook is adopted by reference into the Florida Administrative Code through Chapter 40E2. The water reservations are important because this area includes a number of listed species and other species of importance, including wood storks and snail kites, bald eagles, and a nationally recognized largemouth bass fishery. Next. The Kissimmee Reservation water bodies are comprised of 3 groups. The first is the upper chain of lakes, shown in the figure in pink. This includes Lake Toho, East Lake Toho, and a number of smaller lakes and interconnected canals. The second group are the headwaters revitalization lakes, shown in green in the figure. This includes Lakes Kissimmee, Cypress, Hatchinaha, and Tiger, as well as their interconnected canals. And the last group, shown in purple on the map, is the Kissimmee River and floodplain, which also includes the Istapoga Canal and floodplain, the C38 canal, and a number of remnant river channels from the S65 structure at the northern end down to the S65E structure at the southern end. Next. The Kissimmee Water Reservation area covers 172,500 acres. It spans portions of the upper Kissimmee Basin as well as the lower Kissimmee Basin planning areas, shown in the figure to the right within the green and orange lines. The upper chain and headwaters lakes provide most of the water for the Kissimmee River. So the water reservations will also support the ongoing Kissimmee River Restoration Project to restore historic flows to the Kissimmee River. Next. The water proposed for reservation includes surface water up to specific water reservation stages in the upper chain of lakes, as well as all water within the Kissimmee River and headwaters revitalization lakes. It also includes surface water and quantities required for the protection of fish and wildlife in contributing water bodies. Those are the gray water bodies in the figure. These contribute surface water to the reservation water bodies. Groundwater in quantities required for the protection of fish and wildlife is also proposed for reservation in both the reservation water bodies and the contributing water bodies. And with that, I'll turn it back to Don.
All right. Thank you, Tony. I'm going to just give a recap of the last public workshop that we had, and just to kind of briefly go over some of the topics we covered in our last presentation or our last workshop, and let you all know that all of these presentations that I'm going to cover from the recap from the last workshop are available online in our Water Reservations webpage under the Kissimmee Reservations tab. So just like the last workshop that we had, we covered the water reservation process, similar to what Tony just covered, and the Kissimmee River Restoration Project, and some of the underpinnings associated with how we established water reservations were done in 3 different presentations. And during those presentations, Steve Bosquin spoke about the Kissimmee River restoration background and goals, and that the construction would be completed this year in 2020, as you can see in this slide to the right with the green bracket that shows the Kissimmee River restoration project. And in order to restore the river the way that we wanted to, the way it looked historically, is to actually restore the physical form of the river and to modify the inflows to somewhat historic conditions. And so part of that was being done with the headwaters revitalization schedule, which is being implemented in the headwater lakes that Tony just referred to for Kissimmee, Cypress, and Hatch and Hall that are circled in red on the left slide. And so this additional storage, allowed by HRS, which is the headwaters regulation schedule, will provide the flow needed to restore the Kissimmee River down below S65. And as part of his Steve's discussion, he talked about the AFET-W model, which is the alternative formulation and evaluation tool. And that tool was designed specifically for the water reservation. Steve spoke briefly about the targeted time series, and that was the line above and below which the project-based incorporates the needs of fish and wildlife. And what he showed during those presentations, those slides, is that the needs of fish and wildlife were not all met, meaning that, all the water is needed for the protection of fish and wildlife within the headwater lakes in the Kissimmee River. And that's why all the water is being protected within those particular reservation water bodies. David Anderson hit on the upper and lower time series, targeted time series. And he talked about this time series represented a range of flows that protect fish and wildlife, and allowing a reduction from the upper time series target to the midpoint below the upper and lower ranges provides a additional margin of safety for the protection of fish and wildlife of the Kissimmee River. That reduction average would allow up to a 5% reduction of average annual flows to the river. And that's how the 5% reduction was incorporated into the rule. And that's what we were using as the threshold to make sure that we don't exceed allowing withdrawals above that amount that reduce those flows at 65 below the 5%. And there was a previous permit action which took away from a portion of that 5%, and what we have incorporated into the rule is a 4.18%, which is reflective of that reduction that had already occurred from this recent permit action. Zach Welch talked about the technical approach used to establish the water reservation lines in the upper chain of lakes. He showed that all the historic and managed water levels are significantly different from how they're managed now. And if you'll recall, he showed a slide that showed pre-regulation schedule versus what you see in this blue line here, this band that you see below the regulation schedule. The regulation schedule is the yellow line, and the water reservation line is the black line. And the blue line that you see behind and underneath the regulation schedule is the interquartile range, which essentially encompasses all the flows between the 25th and 75th percentiles. And what Zach showed was that, the historic water levels, in the hydrology does affect habitat and the type, quality, as well as the availability for fish and wildlife, and that the fish and wildlife have adapted to the existing hydrologic regimes within these lakes. And it also includes the existing legal uses that have been going on within the lakes, those withdrawals that are already existing within the lake. So that the water reservation line that you see is the black line in this graphic. It protects the stages, the maximum and minimum stages. It protects the breeding season. It also protects the transition from the minimum to the maximum in the lake fill capacity. So it includes the downward trending line to June 1st, and then the ascension line after June 1st. And Zach also talked about some of the changes in recession rates for two lakes, and that was East Lake Topekaliga and Lake Topekaliga, and that the managed recession lines were and that how these water reservation lines were established within these two lakes is a little bit different from the rest of the lakes within the upper chain of lakes. Sean Scully talked briefly about the technical document. He gave us a real nice overview of the technical document and everything that was covered within that technical document. And then after that, Nick Patani talked about changes to the draft reservation rules and permitting criteria. And Nick discussed what changed since the last workshop that we had. And then Nick will also discuss today some of the changes that we've incorporated based on the public comments that we've received. And finally, Cal Nydrower talked about the UKOPS modeling tool, modeling evaluation. That's the Kissimmee Operation Simulation Model. And this is the new model that we've incorporated into this review process. He discussed the model purpose. He also talked about a lot of the complex statistics that this model is able to do with outputs and its ability to do a very short time run, which is a real big time saver as opposed to using a complex model. This spreadsheet model works very quickly, and it was used for evaluating multiple withdrawal scenarios using the proposed reservation criteria that we have as part of the draft rules now. And Cal also mentioned that this tool, the UKOPS modeling tool, would be used for evaluating future water use permits to ensure that we don't exceed that critical threshold at 5% at S65, which is now 4.18%, and to ensure that we don't exceed that withdrawal and reduce the flows below that could potentially impact the needs of fish and wildlife within the river and the part of the Kissimmee River Restoration Program. And again, all of these presentations are available on our reservations website, so they are available for your review. And that's that for that topic. So that was a summary of our last last workshop. And now what I want to do is kind of change gears a little bit and go into the summary of comments and that we've received from a number of different entities. We've got comments from utility groups, agricultural groups, environmental, as well as the Seminole Tribe of Florida. So I'm going to go into some of these public comments and kind of group them into four basic categories. One, or some of the general comments that we've received, and then secondly, go into the specific rule comments that we got in both 40E10 and then the Applicants Handbook, and then finally some of the comments we got on the technical document itself. So some of the general comments we received was allowing withdrawals in the early part of the wet season have the potential of compromising the water levels later in the season. And there were also concerns that impacts within the Central Florida Water Initiative region may be adversely affecting groundwater seepage within the Kissimmee Basin. There was also concerns that the reservation needs to protect the flows during the dry season to ensure that the minimum flowing level for Lake Okeechobee is met and not decreasing the water that's available for the Lake Okeechobee service areas, stormwater treatment areas, as well as many of the natural areas. Some more general comments we've received was that everybody wanted a little, I shouldn't say everybody, but some certain entities were wanting more information about the approval process for permittees to request withdrawals during the environmental releases. And the environmental releases were part of that rule section that does not withdraw reserve water. So, and then there was a question about adequate water. No, not a question, but a statement that adequate water is vitally important to protect the hydrology and to reach the full restoration potential. And this reservation is essential. There's also a comment in support that in order to protect the public's $8 million investment, the district must adopt the rule and set aside water for the protection of fish and wildlife. And then there was support for the district's effort to reserve all the water in the lower basin, the water reservation lines within the upper chain of lakes, as well as supporting the downstream check at within Lake Okeechobee. Some of the comments we received on the 40E10 rule, these are our water reservation rules as Tony indicated. Lake Topekalaga and East Lake Topekalaga water levels will be managed close to the water reservation lines, which has the potential of limiting the availability of water to an existing user. There were also concerns about contributing water bodies, that the definition was inconsistent in a couple locations. And so we will certainly look at that. And the extent of each water should be listed in the rule. And other contributing water bodies were not included. And I wanted to mention too that as we went through a lot of these public comments, we tried to incorporate those changes that we could within a fairly quick order. And that's what Nick will talk about, many of those changes that have been incorporated. There are other changes that you all provided comments on that we needed more time, staff needed more time to evaluate the impact of those potential changes. So some of those changes did not all get incorporated for this workshop, but they are still being evaluated, and we are certainly taking those comments into consideration. So I wanted to make sure everybody understood that. Some of the public comments we've received on the Applicants Handbook is to request more clarity on the withdrawals for the Florida aquifer system and potential influences on this official aquifer system, that there was a conflict with indirect withdrawals. So there was a concern. Suggest analyzing the cumulative effects that dispersed water management storage projects have on flows into Lake Okeechobee from the Kissimmee watershed and the potential water uses that could be at risk. The next comment was request more clarity on uses that do not withdraw reserve water, including uses that qualify for general permits. And then consider adding temporary dewatering activities to the list of uses that do not withdraw reserve water. And finally, request for more clarity on the rule terms. Specifically, supplemental and primary supply has the potential to limit operational flexibility of a utility, and they felt like it was unnecessarily constraining. Just a few more comments on the Applicants Handbook. The approach used for determining the allocation of water should be based on a whichever is less criteria, and that is using a reasonable beneficial demand of the use class and the rated capacity of the withdrawal facility. There was concern that we not specify the model version for the UK Ops model. I think as I recall in the rule is model version 3.12. And your public comments indicated that it might be better to allow applicants to propose site-specific changes based on localized conditions. And finally, there was a request for more clarity on how regulatory releases to the estuaries are determined. So just switching gears here for public comments related to the technical document. Um, they needed more clarity on existing legal uses um, to ensure that and make sure that it was clear that those existing legal uses were used in determining the water reservation lines. More recent data and information should be considered for establishing the water reservation lines within Lakes Myrtle, Preston, and Joel. And then finally, consider other contributing water bodies and connections to the Lake Cullen as well as the Econolocahatchee River basins. So those were the public comments that we received. And like I indicated, we are still evaluating many of these comments. And Nick is going to go over some of the comments that we did have an opportunity to incorporate. So Nick, I will turn it over to you at this point, if you can go over these revisions.
Okay, thank you, Don. My name is Nicholas Vitani. I'm a section leader in the Water Use Bureau, and my areas of expertise are Central Florida, in particular for this area, and also I handle Dade and Broward and Palm Beach as well. So we're going to go over what we've changed, revised since the last public workshop. And as Don said, these we have not had a chance to evaluate all of the public comments. We're going to be doing that in the coming weeks. But we did address some of the easier ones. Most of these are cleanup or clarification issues. So go ahead and go to the next slide, Don. Okay, so in the technical document, one of the revisions we made were there was 3 existing legal users in the table that were actually not using Kissimmee Reservation water bodies. So we removed those, and then the text in the technical document reflects that as well. Okay, so the next one is related to how we established recession rates based on review of historical dry season stage data for each water body. And most regulation schedules for the upper chain of lakes allows for maximum water levels until March 15th, except Lakes Myrtle, Preston, Joel, which begin receding after December 1st, before declining to a seasonal low on May 31st. So we recognize that there's historical dry season and breeding season hydrology variations between the water bodies, especially relative to their regulation schedule. So in order to protect these varying historical patterns, the scientists selected the average daily stage on March 15th and drew recession lines between the seasonal high and seasonal low targets. This is all review, but the sentence that was added was just to clarify because of the earlier recession on Lakes Myrtle, Preston, Joel, the lines coincide at the beginning of the year. So this separating the lines, drawing the lines that vary from the regulation stage was different from the other lakes because these lines are already the same. So between November and the low in June 1st, the regulations schedule and the water reservation line are essentially the same. So that just basically explains the previous methods weren't needed for this because the lines already coincide. Okay, and so on the Applicants Handbook, we added a sentence here to clarify, to basically provide some operational flexibility to existing legal users. So uses that do not reserve water, some of the items, and it includes crop changes that do not change the allocation or results in a decrease in the permit allocation. So that just allows some flexibility for existing legal users. Okay, next one. And this paragraph in the Applicant's Handbook under uses that do not use reserve water, we basically just took 2 bullets that were exactly like this, but we just consolidated them just to clean up the language. And it includes for reallocation or transfer of water use permits involving direct withdrawal of surface water or an indirect withdrawal of groundwater. And again, this is what was in there before, but it was in 2 different bullets. And so we just consolidated them into one. So nothing's really changed there. And in the Applicant's Handbook, in this section, we added the words for additional criteria for issuance of permits from the upper channel lakes or contributing water bodies. And then in the second sentence, I think before it just said something about surface water. So we just clarified just to include water from contributing water bodies may not always be available for use. And in the next section in the Applicants Handbook, again, under the issuance of permits criteria, this language in red was added to add some operational flexibility to not limit the existing legal users. So when looking at the suitability of the source for the use, we allowed you to basically consider the proposed withdrawals in combination with any other sources of water that you already have at your disposal to meet the reasonable beneficial needs. So this doesn't constrain existing legal users, gives them more flexibility on what types of other sources they have to consider their suitability in using the reservation water bodies. Okay, next slide. And here we broke out and separated groundwater from surface water. I think in the previous version, it was a little confusing. We may have mixed and matched in these paragraphs, so we basically just separated out. So under the reservation areas and paragraph 2, we specifically discussed groundwater, and that's the superficial aquifer system groundwater contributing to the reservation water body or its contributing water bodies. And then the third paragraph deals with surface water. So we just basically separated groundwater and surface water into the paragraphs. We didn't change any meaning or the rule. We just changed some of the words to make it more clear and keep the separate groundwater and surface water separate. And we did that same exact change for all of the different water reservation. Go ahead, next slide. So we used the same change for all of the various water bodies in these sections as well. Okay, go to the next one. So one more change in 40E10. This was just a editorial on the some of the upper channel lakes graphs shown here of the reservation stage. We just relabeled the y-axis to just include the whole numbers. Nothing's changed other than just labeling the y-axis. Okay, so as we mentioned before, we have not taken into consideration all of the public comments quite yet. We're still reviewing those, but some of the comments that we did see that we could address now, we wanted to go ahead and just show you a couple of things that we are going to explain here. And one of the comments was to describe a process for requesting a special withdrawal. So as you know, in the conditions that withdrawals could be authorized in lieu of the reservation lines if the district is making a environmental or regulatory release. And so we come up with a little process just to go over here. And so we envision that we're going to be emailing out all permittees that are withdrawing from Kissimmee Reservation water bodies that a release is occurring. And this will be, typically we will send this out if we know that we're going to be doing an environmental or regulatory release at least 1 week or longer, to give permittees the opportunity to request making a special withdrawal. So once we email the permittees, the permittee will have we have a form I'll show you next. They will just submit the form to request a special withdrawal. We'll review it, and then we will send back the authorization. And the special withdrawal would probably be more than just a daily allocation, because usually these are going to be more than a week or 2 or longer, depending on what the particular objectives are of the drawdown. And so we will pretty much give a duration of the special withdrawal. And then there's going to be some other qualifiers, but that's going to be more details that we'll tell you about later. But this is the basic process that we're going to do. So go ahead to the next slide. And so we developed a form, and this is still in draft, but This is basically a water use compliance form. When the district emails the permittees that are that are permitted under the Kissimmee Reservation rules, that the withdrawals are being made, then the permittee can fill out this form and send it in to the district. We will get it reviewed, and in the bottom we will have some instructions as far as the beginning date and the end date. And each morning they're going to be still having to look at the water levels, and they're going to have to still comply with the condition there that's shown. But so that's the general process that we have so far. So we're attempting to show that, we're addressing the comments that we had on how to process special withdrawals. So this is kind of what we had in mind at this point. And I think that was all the changes we had at this point. I'll turn it back over to Don.
Okay. Thanks, Nick. Appreciate it. And so at this time, we'll go ahead and take questions from the public. I just want to make sure that you all have a Q&A feature on your Zoom toolbar. If you do not, you may have to log off and log back on. But there should be a Q&A feature on your Zoom toolbar, and you can submit the questions to us regarding the information that's been presented. And again, I'd like to ask you all, as you submit the questions, to try and be as specific as possible for each question. And if the question is regarding a particular slide number, we can always go back to the presenter or the slide number to try and clarify that. So at this time, we'll go ahead and start taking comments, your comments. So please submit them through the Q&A feature. Camille, do we have any questions at this time?
So we've only gotten one question, and it actually looks more appropriate to FWC and directly referencing a slide in the presentations or directly related to water reservation. So it might be more appropriate to provide a written answer.
Okay. All right. Are there any other questions you all want to submit, or any other burning questions about the water reservation in general? We'll be sure to take those at this time and indicate those questions live. I see a question here about from Diane Perry. This is Don Medellin. There's a question here from Diane Perry. It sounded like the Kissimmee Basin would like more water retained. Can that help Lake Okeechobee during the hurricane season? Our goal, as we indicated, is to try and allow, Diane, I'll go ahead and answer that question for you. This is Don Medellin. The whole idea of some of the provisions we have in the rule that do not use reserve water is to allow, during the wet season, to allow some of those withdrawals to occur to prevent water during the wet season from going down the Lake Okeechobee and then being discharged to the estuaries. So that's the idea, is to try and take some of those flows, high flow periods and discharges that would go to the estuaries, and try and capture it in the upper basin where possible. So that's the answer to that question. Any other questions we have, Camille?
Yes, we have two questions that look like they would be appropriate for Nick. First is from Paul Gray. He asks, when water is available for allocation, how will applications be prioritized both in Hoopsit, and how much can individual parties get? Nick, want to go ahead and answer that?
Okay, I'll add. As far as how much, everyone, whoever withdraws, they're subject to their permit allocations. So there's not going to be a limit as far as that goes, as whatever your permit allocation is on your daily withdrawal that you're permitted for. I don't think we have any kind of priority. If you're talking about just existing users of the reservation rule, then I don't see that we're going to prioritize. It's just going to be whoever wants it, because when the goals are met, then that's how long the withdrawals will occur. But I don't think we're going to have a prioritization or a limit if there's a special withdrawal.
And this is Don Medellin. I'd like to add to that, Nick, and saying that the existing legal uses will continue as in the past, because they're part of the historic signal associated with the water, the hydrologic regime in many of these lakes. However, permits issued after the rule is implemented, again, they would be subject to the maximum of 4.18% at the S65. That would be the maximum amount of water that would be allowed to ensure that fish and wildlife are protected at downstream within Kissimmee River Restoration Project. Hopefully that answers your question there, Paul Gray.
Yeah, I think between the two of us, that should cover both situations. Wasn't sure if he was asking about special withdrawals or permit, but yeah, so that should answer both situations. Regarding the question on the withdrawals from the Florida aquifer system.
Yes, can you read that question? Nick, if you're going to answer that, go ahead and read it verbatim.
So the question from Nicholas Porter is clarity on withdrawals from the Florida aquifer system potentially influencing the surficial, something you are still considering for revisions. So I'm just going to answer yes, we're still considering all of the public comments, including this one.
There's another question here, follow-up from Paul Gray. Ask another way, what if X acre feet are available, but twice that amount of applications come in for it? I think to answer your question, Paul, and certainly Cal Nydrower or Zach Welch can jump in on answering this question if you guys want to add anything, but I think once we exceed that 4.18% at S65, whatever that volume of water is that allows reduction to that point, that would be it. There would be no permits issued after that threshold is exceeded. Do you guys want to add anything to that answer?
This is Cal. I don't want to add anything. I think you covered it.
Okay.
Okay, Don, there's a question from Gary Ritter. Once this becomes rule, will the Kissimmee River Reservation become part of the Lower Kissimmee water supply planning process? Oh, Jennifer Brown would like to answer this.
Hey Gary, this is Jennifer Brown. I believe the Lower Kissimmee Basin Water Supply Plan already mentioned that this was going on, but definitely all water reservations are included in the regional water supply plan. So this would be referenced both in the CFWI Joint Regional Water Supply Plan and the Lower Kissimmee.
Okay, we'll take some more questions at this time. We'll give it a few more minutes for anybody else that has questions about the water reservation, the rule criteria, any of the presentation material, or general questions about the water reservation, what it's designed to protect at this time. Okay. Camille, I'm not seeing any more questions at this time. Are you?
That's correct. I don't see any more.
Okay. With that, I'm going to go ahead into the next steps. This is Don Medellin. And we'll receive additional public comments until Tuesday, June 23rd. And comments, again, can be submitted to Tony Edwards at the email address indicated there. And the workshop presentations from today will be posted on the Kissimmee Reservations webpage like normal, as well as you can go back and review the presentations that were from the last workshop there as well. And our next rulemaking workshop is scheduled for the August-September timeframe. The location and specific date are to be determined. And I suspect it may be with the same format. We're not sure if we're going to be back to doing face-to-face meetings, but we'll determine that as we get closer and keep you all in the loop as to when that specific date might occur. And there's additional information here about the Water Reservations webpage. So any information regarding the technical document, the draft rules for 40E-10, as well as the Applicants Handbook and the workshop presentations are all at this Reservations webpage. You can also, there's also additional information out there on the Kissimmee web board under the SFWMD rule development topic. And then finally, if there's any questions about the existing rules that we have, those certainly can be found at the link regarding rules here at the district. So with that, I don't have any additional comments. So I want to thank you all for your participation in this fourth workshop, and for taking time out of your schedule to attend the workshop today. And despite the challenging times that we're all facing, we're encouraged to know that you are taking time out of your schedule to join us. And we had over 100 people registered today. And just wanted to let you know that we do value your input, and there's still time to provide additional public comments until June 23rd. And then we'll have another public workshop, like I indicated, somewhere in the August-September timeframe, and we'll keep you in the loop on that. And if you are not on our distribution list, you can certainly email Tony Edwards, and she will add you to our distribution list, and we'll keep you in the loop as to the latest happenings regarding this rule development process. With that, I want to thank you all again, and appreciate your participation, and look forward to seeing you the next time. In the meantime, stay healthy and safe until we meet again. Thanks, everyone.